Morning, everybody. This is Jeff Morton. Uh, it's early in the morning, usually is when I do these things, and I'm kind of inspired this morning by because due to a story, really, that's making the headlines of a black man who was vilified for wearing a Make America Great Again hat in support of Donald Trump down in Miami. He worked at the cheese factory, and apparently several of his coworkers didn't appreciate him wearing that hat when he took his mother out to Mother's Day dinner there at the cheese factory. And so they harassed him and threatened to beat him up and whole 9 yards. And I got to see him speak about it this morning on the news, Fox News. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But let me give you a little background first before I do that. Well, I really just kind of want to point that story out to you. And it's this thing here that has inspired. It inspired the book Uncoloring Race that I wrote. It inspired my website and everything that I do in with regard to racism. Okay, so but I want to tell you something. I want to share a little bit of my heart with you folks. I kind of do that every time I do this, I suppose. But I want to read something first before we get started. I'm going to be reading from Leviticus chapter 19, starting in verse 17. Actually, 16. You should not go about as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You should not hate your brother in your heart. You should surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. You should not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Okay. So right there, for all of you believers, the Bible's pretty clear. The word of the Lord is very clear. You're not supposed to hate. You're not supposed to hate. And the word love there can be translated as loyalty. So I kind of go by those words of wisdom because they really protect life. And those of you who know me know that. I read this book, Unfounded Loyalty. This was sent to me by a friend of mine who introduced me to Reverend Wayne Perryman. Now, I started studying all of the stuff that's in this book. I started learning this in 1980. So when I got this book in like 1994, and this is one of my favorite books of all times, called Unfounded Loyalty, an in-depth look at the blind love affair between blacks and Democrats. This is an outstanding book because he details actual historical information. But this book here, when I read this, I went, my God, this is what I studied. So I connected to it immediately. My favorite book, by the way. Then somebody sent me this book. It's called The Legend of Arab Islam in Africa. And so I used to hear all this stuff about how black folks were kings and queens of Africa. And then John Azuma, he's a Christian, African Christian. When I read his book, I went, this is more like the truth. Because for the most part, most of Africa was slaves of Islam for almost 1,400 years. And this book does a very good job of exposing that truth. Because what we hear today, you don't even hear about this. You don't even hear about this. You hear about how the white man enslaved the black man through the Dutch, through the English, and through America. But you never hear about the horrific slave and the slave trade and the Arab slave trade that was going on right almost literally when Allah came to power and began to kill everything with the sword. More recently, I read this book, The Roots of Christian Anti-Semitism by Malcolm Hay. This book is not in print anymore. And this book is, if you want to understand the hell that the Jewish people went through at the hands of Christians and Catholicism, this is a very, very good book because it recounts that history. This book will make you cry. This book will make you cry. This book will make you cry. Okay? So, I put all of that under one category, lawlessness. You know, when I was growing up in Rochester, New York, well, let me tell you about this experience I had. I went to the home of Harriet Tubman as a child. She died in Auburn, New York. And we have my mother's older sister. She married into the McLeod family, which is a huge family that lived in Auburn. Most of them were raised up there. Of course, my mother's family was huge too. There was 14 kids. And in my father's family, there was 11 kids. So they all knew each other in Auburn, New York. But I went there. They were painting Josiah McLeod's house. The whole family got together to paint his house. He was like the grandfather of this entire clan. And I'm just a little kid. And so during the course of that weekend, or whatever it was, I got to go down the street, literally down the street and around the corner to Harriet Tubman's house. And for those of you who don't know who Harriet Tubman are, most of you millennials that is, she was the leader of the Underground Railroad. She freed thousands of slaves and got them out of the South and brought them to the North. In her house, she had a little picture that was called Black Moses, and this was a historical home. But it wasn't a historical home in the way that it is now, because the NAACP bought it, and they fixed it all up in the whole 9 yards several years ago. But I remember seeing a picture of her, and it said Black Moses, as a kid. I wanted to know who she was, so I started studying her. I started looking at her. I was always into history, folks. I was always into history. It was one of my favorite subjects in school. Which, I eventually found Frederick Douglass. I found out that he was the editor of the North Star paper. I found out that he lived in Rochester. I found out that he died in Rochester. So I went to his cemetery, rode my bike up to the Mount Hope Cemetery, and I found his grave site. And you got to understand, folks, I'm just a little kid. I'm like 11 and 12 years old. And one of the things that inspired me about these people was they fought not to be, they fought to be human beings. They fought because they didn't want to be treated like farm animals. And they didn't want to be treated like, somebody's possession. They fought to have the dignity of being a human being. And it wasn't about skin color for them. It was about dignity and liberty and freedom. Now, I have gone on to read countless articles and information about Frederick Douglass, and several of the articles that he published. Same is true with Harriet Tubman. I was studying, looking back at some of her quotes and things that she had said. So this has always been a part of who I am. I remember as a child in New York, growing up in Rochester, New York, I hated that I had to be cool, and that I had to be tough, and I had to be black, and I had to be black and proud. I just wanted to be a child, a kid. I just wanted to be who I was, and I like to say I just wanted to be my mother's son. For me, it wasn't about being black or white. It wasn't about the color of my skin. My whole life has been that way. It really, I can't say enough. I remember the first girlfriend I had when I was a child. It was a white girl in our neighborhood. And our neighborhood was white when we moved into it, but by the time we moved out of it, it was predominantly black. And most of the folks living there were renting. But this white girl moved into the neighborhood, and she liked me and I liked her, and we carried on a relationship for a number of years. But I took a whole lot of hell from the black community in my neighborhood for messing with this white girl. And that was when I began to realize that racism wasn't about white people hating black people. Racism was about racism. It didn't matter the color of your skin. And the older I got, I started seeing racism in the Asian community, racism against each other in the Asian community. I began to see racism with white folks, So I began to see racism as a systemic problem, not a black problem. Okay? So I got sent off to Georgian Republic, and I started seeing all these white kids, and they had these kids, they had problems that were far greater than anything I had gone to. I used to say that white people had the kind of problems that money could afford. In any event, I began to realize that everybody was kind of screwed up. Everybody. But I always thought that, why can't we just get along? So I swore that I was not going to live based on the color of my skin. I made that determination when I was 17. I went in the military. I had 3 black men in the military. They came up to me and they said, "Why you hang around with all these white folks? And why you socialize with all these white folks?" And I said to him, I remember this as clear as day. I said, because these 3 brothers, they were older than me. They came up to my bunk on the ship and they asked me, "Why you hang around all these white folks?" And I remember saying to them, because they don't ask me stuff like this, and I didn't use the word stuff. "Get away from my rack." That's exactly what I told them, because I don't want to participate. I don't want, even then, we're talking 40 years ago, I did not want to be the color of my skin. I wanted to be more of the content of my character. And I've always been that way my whole life. So when those famous quotes by Martin Luther King and where he was coming from and what he was trying to accomplish, he was fighting the lawless folks that hated black folks. The majority of the country didn't. If the majority of the country hated black folks, slavery would have never ended. So I just wanted to be part of this thing called life. And I wanted my mind to be free from the color of my skin. I didn't want society to tell me that I had to be black in order to be anything. And in America, I wanted to be whatever I could be. And I believe that. And I still believe that. So when I began to see the hell of the Democrat Party, I knew I could not attach myself to this party. When I started reading the works of Cornel Wilde and listening to some of the folks like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and Maxine Waters, I knew I could never identify with those people, because everything they do is based on the color of their skin and holding on to the anger that Harriet Tubman lived and died for so that I didn't have to. That Frederick Douglass lived and died for so that I didn't have to. So for me, it's about honoring the lives of those people and what they fought for. Every one of those abolitionists, both white, black, and Jewish, who fought against slavery, and all those Christians who fought against slavery. I want to represent those people in my life. I want to represent America. America was the first country on the face of the earth that didn't have limited goods. Limited goods was a kind of like a stationary existence. You were born this way and that's the way you died. That's the way the world worked. Daniel McGurk does a great job talking about that. But America was the first country that was born from that. We had to overcome the hell of slavery. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, there's people living for the God of the Bible. There's people who believe Leviticus 19. And then there's people who reject all of that, okay? It doesn't matter where you live. The people who reject this book, these are the people that we're fighting. These are the people that we're fighting against. The people who believe in this book, but also practice racism, anti-Semitism, and bigotry, we're fighting those people too. And they're sitting in the pews next to you. So for me, Uncoloring Race is about being free in order to experience the value that this book gives to all of us. It's about liberty, freedom, and life. And so if the color of my skin determines my attitude, then chances are I'm not going to practice the liberty and the freedom that this book offers to all of mankind. So for me, it's not about being the color of your skin. It's about fulfilling the purpose of your creation. And to me, that means life. So as I look, I love Donald Trump. I love what he's doing. I see the character flaws in him. I got character flaws in me. And all of you folks out there that are addressing him because he's either this, that, or the other, check yourself, because you probably have some things about your character that you struggle with, but you aren't the President of the United States of America. And you didn't get to that position. And the people didn't vote you into that place. So for Donald Trump and what he's doing and the job he has to do and deal with for the American citizen, I'm right there with you, young man, at the cheese factory. Right there with you. In fact, you've even inspired me to go get my Donald Trump hat that says "Make America Great Again." I believe this, first and foremost, that my allegiance is to the kingdom of God. But he has placed me into the kingdom of America. And so I'm going to represent the kingdom of God while I live in the kingdom of America. And for right now, Donald Trump has done a brilliant job. And when I listen to you black folks vilify him, there's a whole lot of black folks out here who celebrate him. And I'm starting to see a whole lot more of them than y'all. So this is Jeff Morton on Color and Rays. God bless you guys. Have a good day. Bye-bye.